Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Conservation Stories. I'm your host, Tillery Timmins Sims. Conservation Stories is brought to you by the Sandhill Area Research Association, SARA. SARA Conservation is interested in all things that have to do with our ecosystems, whether they are the environment or financial or anything that has to do with rural America, West Texas, Eastern New Mexico. We just are about a lot of things. That is because we have ADD. And you can't beat it. I mean, hey, right? It's either a superpower or it's not. So I'm excited today that we have Leah Doozy with us. I heard about Leah through a friend who heard you speak, and she said, this lady knows all the things about EPA and all the things about chemical regulation and all this stuff. And so I'm excited. We got together and visited for a while. And I think that this is going to be such an interesting conversation because people are, right now, we just had this, right, Make America Healthy Again. So people are looking at, glyphosate. They're worried about atrazine. They're worried about these chemicals, which many of them may not know that they're actually using them on their yards in really high concentration levels. So some people, they know what they are. They'd never touch them. Mm-hmm. But there's a process by which all of this goes through. And I think it would be helpful to hear from you about your job. So start by telling us, give us your background and tell us about your company.
Great. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I'm Leah Doozy. I work for Compliance Services International. We're a global regulatory and environmental strategy company. So we work with anything that's regulated. Okay. So whether that's agricultural chemicals or whether that's cosmetics in Europe, right? So anything that's regulated. Okay. In the U.S., predominantly agricultural chemicals.
Okay.
So my background is in agricultural economics. So kind of wonder, how do you get from ag econ to pesticide regulation? So I spent 15 years with the USDA. I worked for NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service in St. Paul, Minnesota. And then I moved to Auburn, Alabama, which is where I live now. And I worked for the Agricultural Research Service doing applied research in conservation systems. So looking at how cover crops, no-till, nutrient management, how those work in the system to be able to manage, say, herbicide-resistant weeds, or address other resource concerns like erosion, runoff, et cetera. So my background is in production agriculture. My dad's a farmer in Georgia. So all of my knowledge is a combination of knowledge of growing up on a farm and how agriculture works in the Southeast with a combination of education and economics. So a lot of professional experience.
You've got the perfect foundation for this. And what I love about that, you also worked in conservation, so people can know that you've looked firsthand at the science, and you've seen the science, you've seen the impact of chemical use, probably in positive and negative ways. And you've stood out in the middle of those fields where some of those things have been applied. And so I think you are perfect for the job that you have. Your whole experience has kind of just led to this fit.
It is amazing how those two things have met. I think when I first started, I've been with CSI since 2017. And so I think I didn't really understand how those two worlds were going to collide in the way that they have. I started out doing economics for CSI, and then I progressed into doing mostly endangered species work. So really looking at how federal regulations work with the Endangered Species Act as it relates to how pesticides are registered.
So that's great.
Strange world of how it all comes together.
But what I love, though, is that you have been exposed to both sides. And so that's why I feel like you are in such a great position for people to understand, hey, I've been on the side to say, how is this chemical impacting our environment and working to protect the environment or the endangered species? And that's really what the whole idea of these regulations are about, is how do we prevent harm, and how can we also use what we have in a way. And we've mentioned this before, like on fossil fuels, like the responsible use of something that is essential to our lives every day, because without it, you and I would not be talking at this minute, and we are years away from transitioning completely away from fossil fuels, and we'll be looking at mining different resources for different types of energy. And either way, whatever we do, whatever kind of energy we use, we're using something in the environment and we're putting something new in the environment. And it's important for us to be aware of the consequences as much as we can be. So let's do it like this. We're in role play. I have a chemical, and I figured this out in my garage. And this thing, I swear to you, I promise, I'm the creator, is going to kill weeds, but it doesn't hurt microbial life. It doesn't hurt any, like the microbes in the soil, they don't get hurt. And it's going to kill a weed, but like if a butterfly lands on it, it won't get sick. It's not going to matter. So I've come to you and I have said, hello, here's my chemical. And I would like to have this approved by EPA. How do I do that?
So from start to finish, to register a pesticide takes anywhere around 11 years, right?
I might be dead by then.
It can take a lot of years to get through that, because it's the testing that the industry does, so the person registering the product, plus it has to go through the EPA process.
Okay.
So all pesticides in the U.S. are regulated under two different regulations. The first one is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act. We call it FIFRA. That's what it stands for. So when people say FIFRA, it's the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. That is EPA governs the registration, the labeling, distribution, sale, and use of pesticides in the U.S.
Okay.
And so that is the first way. The second way is under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which is actually EPA sets what's called maximum residue limits. So that is the amount of pesticide residue allowed on food or animal feed in the U.S. And then FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, are the ones that enforce that.
Okay.
So pesticides are regulated really under two ways. But my focus predominantly is in that FIFRA world. Okay. Where it's regulated through EPA, not necessarily in the human health food side, but on the environmental side.
Okay. Because so I guess it's like it's regulated for environment and it's regulated for human.
Yes.
Consumption or use. Okay.
And also groundwater. There's a lot of, it's not just one thing, right?
Yes.
EPA has a number of different ways that they evaluate products before they are registered in the U.S. And that's really important because there's a lot of testing that goes on. They have testing requirements. They have do biological evaluations, which is how they look at the product, how it's going to impact endangered species. That's my expertise. I have other people that work with us that do the other parts of that. But there's a lot of moving parts to how pesticides are registered. It's not just, let me put in my application and we check a box and we move on. Okay. It takes years.
It takes years. And so I've put in my application and I now need to do this testing. So I'm paying for testing and I'm doing the testing. And then when it gets to EPA, is EPA doing their own individual testing of this product, like replicating what I have done? Or is it that they are relying on the science that I'm providing them? Or do I completely misunderstand how things are working? Because it looks like from your face, you're like, oh, girl, you are so lost.
I'm just thinking about the best way to answer it, because I think that it's not
not that simple.
More complex than that. In a lot of cases, it's not the registrants doing the testing; it's laboratories doing it.
Sure.
Right?
Okay. Right.
Third party testing.
Right. Yes. I'm so sorry,
So,
but yes. I'm taking it to lab.
Yeah, it's fairly complex, and there's a whole list. Like you can go, EPA is very transparent in what they require. It's all on their website. Everything is listed. So they do have all that information out there, and then they evaluate all those testing.
Okay.
So it has to be done by certain laboratories. There's requirements that go along with it.
And I'm as the registrant, I'm paying for all of that to be done. Yes. So if I have something, and am I first going to come to you and say, hey, obviously I don't know how this is done. Can you help me?
Yes.
That's like the first place I could come. Okay.
For
so
people who don't have their own in-house expertise in registration,
right.
As a company, we can help people.
Okay. Okay. So
and that is not, just so we're clear, that is not my expertise.
Right.
I am not the person who does registration. Like I have colleagues that do that.
Yes. Yes.
And for me, where I come in is saying, okay, how does the label that they're putting forth, how does that meet the regulations as it relates to endangered species? What kind of mitigations need to go on it? How do we help people get through the process of figuring out, okay, how they're registering the product, does that meet the regulations that have been put forth by EPA? Okay.
And so specifically the regulations for you, it's specifically the regulations of how is it going to impact endangered species?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So like literally it's so, there's so many parts and pieces. You have to have like an expert for this regulation, an expert for this regulation. And for people that might be unfamiliar for, chemical use, you look on the back, it's going to tell you at what degrees it should be outside. Like if it is hotter or colder than this, you should not spray. If the wind is blowing more than this, you should not spray. You should spray X close to the ground, or you should not use this type of equipment when you're spraying. Like it can be very instructive to and what they're trying to do is mitigate any damage that they're aware can happen. Yes.
And so there's language. So the label is the law. That's what we always say.
Okay.
Labels are the law. They are a legal document. You have to follow your label. That doesn't matter if you're a farmer who's applying it on their field or you're a person applying it in your yard. You should be reading your label. The label is the law. It's what you should follow when you apply that product. It's going to have information about the right PPE or personal protection equipment that you should be wearing. It's going to have information about how you apply that product to limit non-target movement. Whether that would be movement off where you're trying to apply it, whether that's in your yard or in an agricultural field or in right of ways. And so all of that is listed, what your application rate is, how much you should be applying per acre or per square foot. That's going to include application methods. So maybe for example, in agriculture, maybe you can only apply it to ground where you're using conservation tillage, or so there may be limits on how you can use it. Soil types, maybe you can only use it on certain soil types. So there's all these different pesticide labels are very long when you look at them for agriculture, and so there's a lot of different components that go into it, and all of that is based off the information that EPA has evaluated into how those products are used in the field, and that's where. Because of EPA because the registration of pesticides are a federal action, they are required to consult under the Endangered Species Act. And that's really where the conversation has changed since 2022. So prior to 2022, EPA was addressing ESA, but they were kind of punting it a little bit, right? They weren't doing the full analysis for every registration, and they were getting sued. So EPA was wrapped up.
So EPA was literally kind of like not following the law. Is that what you're saying? They weren't. They were. Yeah. Okay.
They were not doing a full ESA assessment.
Okay.
With every registration.
Okay.
Yeah. And they were wrapped up in litigation, and they have acknowledged that. They acknowledged it in early 2022 when they released their work plan of how they were going to do that.
Out here on the Texas plains, water is everything. And there's a resource that's as vital as it is fragile, our playa lakes. These lakes are nature's reservoir, catching rainwater to recharge our aquifer and provide lifelines for wildlife. But now they need our help. In collaboration with the Texas Ply Lakes Conservation Initiative and the Cargill Global Water Challenge, Sarah has started the Our Legacy is Tomorrow's Water initiative to inspire and work with landowners to restore and protect our Ply Lakes. Each playa we save helps secure a sustainable water future for the generations that will be coming after us. Whether it's improving soil health, restoring habitats, or recharging groundwater, we are committed to making a difference. Together, we can build a legacy that we can all be proud of. To learn how you can join in, visit the Ply Lakes Restoration Initiative page on the Sarah website. Let's keep Texas water flowing strong for the future. Visit sarah-conservation.com. How does that start happening? Like, do you have like individuals within this organization that are like, hey, give me a little and you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours?
No,
or is it just like, we don't have time?
Yeah, I think it's a time issue. So there is a backlog of pesticide registrations. Pesticides have to go through what's called registration review every 15 years. So not only do we have new products being registered, right? We have new uses of older products, older chemistries. So you've got this moving sort of wheel of things coming in. So new products, new active ingredients, new uses, but then you also have registration review. So every 15 years, all of these products have to go through on a rolling scale. It was not that it was, so if you look back at those older documents, it wasn't that it was excluded. It was just, we'll do it later.
Interesting.
And they were doing it later.
Right.
But they were getting, we just became more behind.
Yes. Wow.
I don't know if that's the right way to say it.
Okay. Yes. No, it makes sense. It's like, well, we'll go ahead and release this while we're working on this part.
Yes.
But because this part we're so far behind. Yeah.
Yes. And it wasn't that there weren't mitigations on the labels for non-target, right? So endangered species are also considered non-target, right? So, that would be anything that's outside of what you're trying to control. So let's say you have a pigweed concern. The plant that you're trying to kill with your herbicide is pigweed. Right. So you don't want it to move off your field. So anything that's not part of that intent is considered non-target. So that's going to include federally listed species. So they were still included. They just hadn't gone through the process of doing an evaluation of those individual species. Endangered species.
Okay. All right.
That they covered.
They're saying you can't hit any of these species. However, we don't really know how it'll impact them.
Yes.
Okay. So it could be, they're assuming it's going to be bad, but it could actually turn out to be like, it doesn't impact X, Y, or Z, but it does negatively impact all these other things.
Yeah, I think we always talk about the potential for, right? It isn't always, like anything, it isn't always a known, right? And so especially with pesticide use, which is it's not everywhere all the time, right? So it's the potential for, not the actual. Right?
Yes, right. Okay, interesting. Well, we have here we've had an issue with volatilization of dicamba that, sprayed and then collects in the atmosphere and kind of comes down. So it is an interesting, it's created a lot of social tension, in our small communities, not just the economics, but it's been a really sad thing to see some of the response to the damage that's been done, So that's really kind of what you're trying to do, though, is to prevent something that from getting on the market without it being labeled exactly how to apply it so that it doesn't go off target. But what happens if you can't keep it from going off target? What happens then? Like if you find that you can't keep this there's no way to use this in a way that it isn't going to actually go off target. Is that even something that you've ever even seen or heard of?
No, I think that up to this point, there's been ways to mitigate that, right? Like, if you read the dicamba labels, they all said, they addressed that with when to apply it. And
Right.
So there is and I know a lot of states had their own regulations around dicamba.
Yes. Yeah.
When you could use it, when you could not use it.
Right.
And so there are that next level of state regulations. It could be in addition to those federal labels.
Interesting.
And so we did see that a number of times. But I think, there's a lot of different ways. We know that pesticides, so in EPA's work plan related to ESA, they started looking at routes of exposure, right? So whether that was through runoff and erosion, so coming off your field in water or sediment, so they could attach that, or through drift, which is what you're talking about, so through drift. So those were the two main ways that they started looking at in their strategies that they put together to address ESA. So over the last 3 years, EPA has released the Vulnerable Species Action Plan. They've released the herbicide strategy. They've released an insecticide strategy, and they've released a rodenticide strategy. And in those strategies, they lay out how they're going to address the potential for impacts to endangered species. And so we've started seeing those they've finalized those strategies, and we've seen them start to roll those out on different labels. The first one was glufosinate P, or Liberty Ultra. It's a BASF product. That one went through the herbicide strategy. And then there's been another one, an insecticide that's been released and still in draft form. It's not finalized. That's a new active ingredient that came out under the insecticide strategy. So we know how pesticides move off the landscape, and the easiest way to do is to mitigate those, right? So for runoff and erosion, it's no different than what you would do for runoff and erosion. Say if you're trying to minimize the amount of sediment that's getting into your waterway, it's the same practices, right? So cover crops, conservation tillage, grass waterways, filter strips, irrigation water management. So there's all these conservation practices or mitigation measures, as EPA calls them, that a lot of growers are really familiar with.
Right. And are already doing anyway.
Doing them anyway. And that's really helping the use of those good conservation measures are actually reducing the potential for that exposure through those routes of exposure, right? So spray drift is another example. A lot of growers have moved to using different nozzle sizes, different droplet sizes. They drop their booms so that it's lower and closer to the ground. And there's a lot of labels that already had infield buffers, right? So you had to step back off whatever that is you're trying to protect. Those were already on there. So there's a number of ways that you can mitigate that potential risk. And the people registering pesticides were already including those on their label. It's just how it was evaluated, and just a different conversation in that space of how we talk about limiting that potential for exposure.
Yeah. So, I know people are concerned. There's people concerned on both sides about the Make America Healthy Again stuff. And some people are excited about the potential for the no longer using glyphosate. And then there's farmers who are like, do you know? And for people that might not understand, like the increase in, like, say, tillage, like if you're you don't have something to fight, a chemical to fight weeds, well, then you're going to plow more. And that means an increase in greenhouse gas. So like for people to understand, like there's always going to be a give and a take. And so if we look at what is going to do the least amount, what's going to have the least amount of impact, in many cases, it will be a chemical rather than something else. And I think if you could speak to that for a minute, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I think that as an economist, I'll come at this from an economics perspective. There's always trade-offs, right? And so I think that we have to look at what those trade-offs look like, right? So, for example, I'll use my own family as an example. So we use no-till and we use cover crops, and we also grow a second crop. So we're double croppers, right? So in the Southeast, Texas, you can double crop. So we are double croppers. So we always have something growing on our fields. That's one of the ways that we manage weeds. So I think it's growers have recognized that Using products is also expensive, right? So nobody's going out there and wasting their products.
Exactly.
Because
Right.
it costs them money.
Right.
They're expensive. Every trip across their field is money. And it's also time. And that's one of the things that a lot of growers are limited by, especially those who work 2 jobs, right? Who work on their farm and off their farm. There is the risk without herbicides, you would have to go back to increased tillage, which is what you mentioned. And it's not just about the greenhouse gas and the use of the fuel and the heavy tractors and the moldboard plow, but it's also the erosion, right? And so losing that topsoil. And so when your ground is bare, you all of a sudden it's going to move.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, if people don't know that around here, I don't know how.
Yeah. And so I think that it's some of my, my previous life doing research in conservation systems where it was a combination, right? Like we did work looking at, okay, can you use cover crops instead of using herbicides, right? So can you control glyphosate resistant pigweed, which is something most growers are familiar with?
Right.
Can you use cover crops? It wasn't, yes, you can use cover crops, but herbicides are still very important, right? Like if you want to fully control that weed, herbicides are very important in that system.
Right.
And so I think it has to be, this is me as a putting on my conservation hat. I wear a lot of different hats. I think there's ways that we can use our conservation measures along with good technology, right? Which is what we have.
Right.
So along with good technology, conservation practices, there's a way to address those concerns like weeds that is good for where it's good for the environment, right? Where it's minimizing erosion, but it's also optimizing what kind of product we're using.
Right. And I think that's important, like for people to understand is that like, and I mean, people are people. So not every farmer is like, not every farmer cares about the environment, but most of them do. But people are people. People are just people. And so, but what farmers do care about also is like the bottom line, and they can't keep doing what they're doing if they can't make a living. And so, the more tools that we take away from growers, we have to remember that what we're putting at risk is our own food system at times. And so it's important for us to be really thoughtful about the disadvantages and the advantages of the pros and cons of a particular chemical, and in which, I mean, everybody gets to make up their own mind. So this is just information 101, right? But I think for the most part, a lot of folks either dislike the EPA or don't trust the EPA. So, and it feels like either way, and it's like everything else, we kind of make up our mind and then we look for something that confirms what we actually already believe instead of the other way around. So, it's really hard as a human, to make sure that you're aware that you're not just looking for things that confirm what you already want to believe. So a lot of times it feels like even now it's like, well, if I believe it, then it's a fact. Today's episode is brought to you by Evan Stone with Clear Rock Farm and Ranch, part of the Clear Rock Realty Group in Lubbock, Texas. Evan understands West Texas land, agriculture, and what it takes to buy and sell farms and ranches in our unique region. If you're ready to make your next move, trust someone who knows the lay of the land. Visit Evan at clearrockrealty.com, serving Lubbock and the surrounding communities. Clear Rock Farms and Ranch, your partner on the plains. I guess you can't have a crystal ball, and I don't want to put you on the spot either, but like, where do you think we're headed? Like, okay, so we went, it feels like, I don't know what's happening, because it's like you have an expectation that now we have a new administration and they're going to claw some of this back. And then whammo, now you have somebody that's in the administration saying, actually, we're going to actually go the opposite way of where you thought we were going. And we're going to not just go a little bit, we're going to go a lot further.
As a person who exists in the regulatory world, but also who exists in the farmer world, right? So like I provide information to I work with my dad and my brother. I think I see it from both perspectives of like what happens if we have a slowdown in products being registered, right? And that can happen if you have a reduction in staff, when you have EPA being a little bit constrained, right? On how they can work. Then that means there is a consequence to growers and end users of all sorts, right? Not just agriculture, but anybody who needs to use a product, whether that's pest control for your house or pest control for your yard or rodenticides for controlling rat populations, whatever that is. New products have to come out, right? Because that's you do get resistance issues, right? There are resistance.
No, that's something else when you were talking about resistant pigweed, like for people to understand that plants, living things are making decisions, weirdly enough. And literally plants are going, oh, we got a new enemy. And season after season after season, they're evolving to become resistant, so now you can spray glyphosate. I always say it wrong. Across, your pigweed, and
it doesn't.
Pigweed's like whatever.
Yes, and it reproduces very, very quickly.
Yes, it does. It is. I will tell you, the only thing that I have seen that competes very well with pigweed and will outgrow it is hemp. And I mean, I'm telling you, I have been out, I've seen like this one really tall pigweed out in the middle of the hemp field. And I was like, I'm going to pull this up. It has almost no root system. I could not. I mean, when they get big, they can get like, a huge stalk like this. You pull it up and you can't pull it up because the root system is so huge. But once that hemp gets established, you talk about weed control.
I think that, going back to your question about like what to expect, I think right now we're just waiting to see. I think that's where a lot of people are, is just kind of waiting to see where we go and then adjust as we need to.
So does it put your customers, like your clients, in this weird limbo?
I think it does. And it puts people who just work in the industry, in the agricultural industry in general, it puts us in a lot of difficult position, right? To not really know, hoping that they have access to products that they need. Registration, we always say registration by litigation is really not the best option. It provides no regulatory certainty for people who are trying to make decisions on how to produce our nation's fiber. And so I think that there has to be regulatory certainty. And I feel like right now there is just a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's so interesting that you make that point, because I was last week at a critical minerals law conference. And that is something a point that someone brought up was that right now, oil prices are suppressed. They're really, pretty almost, they're not quite so low that people are going to quit drilling, but they're really low. And part of that is due to the fact of when there's clear regulation, investors feel safe. We know exactly what the law is and we follow it. But when there's ambiguity, then investors, they are not comfortable investing in something that could change. And so there's kind of been this suppression of the oil and gas, which it's just so counterintuitive to what we think of would be happening, So I think it's interesting because they did mention that this is happening in multiple, not just in the oil and gas industry, but across multiple industries, because there's so much, we're not sure what's going to happen where. Yeah,
I think that in agriculture and I'm guessing oil and gas is the same way, that agriculture is impacted by, trade policy, right? So prices, because we have global markets.
Yes.
And so how their products are marketed, their trade, what that looks like. And there's downstream impacts, right? Because let's say you have corn, it may go into feed, which goes into cattle, right? So all of our agriculture is really intertwined.
It's all intertwined.
So I think that it's those, and then how it impacts their input, the people who sell their inputs, right? So if I'm a grower and I have to make decisions about what crop I'm going to grow or how many acres I'm going to grow, it has impacts throughout the rural community, whether that's your cotton gins or your fertilizer dealers or your seed production facilities. impacts everybody because agriculture is so intertwined with each other.
It's
So
really true. Just that whole, rural ecosystem, which is just, you can't pull on one without pulling on the other. And yeah, that's a truth. If a farmer's going, I don't know if I'm going to have the tool I need to grow this crop, so I'm going to have to grow this crop instead. So I think people really, consumers, it's important for them, one, to be aware of the difficulty it is to make it through the process, that it is very stringent.
Yes, it is.
If something does make it through, it has been through, like you said, 7 years of testing of how it's going to impact all of these different things.
Or more.
Whether we have or don't have that tool will impact whether we have or don't have certain crops, or even the price of those crops. So if you take away a tool that cuts it makes things, farmers can grow a crop more economically, that really impacts the choices that they're going to make, and also the choices like how much money they're going to have at the end of the season, to give bonuses, to pay bills, to buy a new vehicle if they need it, to do things that spur the economy, especially in rural communities.
It's true for crops where we produce, where the U.S. is the major producer of those crops, right? So you see that a lot of your specialty crops where we do produce a number of those crops that are used by people here, right?
Right.
So whether that's blueberries or apples or oranges for eating orange juice, right? Like all those specialty crops are grown in very specific regions of the country. They're not grown everywhere. They're small acreages. So we're not just, I think a lot of people, when they think of agriculture, they think of corn and soybeans.
Well, and that's a lot of it. I mean, it's true. We are growing a lot of that. Yeah.
A lot of acres of that. There's also the importance of our specialty crops or our minor crops. It's really, really important because we want to be able to produce those fresh fruits and vegetables in the United States.
In fact, I just was interviewing someone on water. We were talking about, she's excited to see some horticulture stuff coming up where we are, where people are growing some more vegetables to be, locally sourced and that kind of stuff. And I think it's good for consumers to be aware. We have a co-op, Brownfield Farmers Co-op. You can find them on Instagram, Facebook, Brownfield Farmers Co-op. And they've been doing a really interesting series with their farmers, talking about, like some people are organic and some people aren't organic. And they talk about, this person's talking about how he uses chemical and how much chemical he's using and what would happen, if he didn't have it. And I think it's an interesting educational for people to listen to. And it's important for us to realize that we have to find a way to all work together. And my mom used to tell me all the time growing up, your freedom ends where mine begins, and vice versa. So we have to recognize that the things that we do impact each other, and work together as a community. And it is often very difficult. And these situations that have arisen in communities like mine have been very hard for longtime friends to figure out how to get past them. And I hope that we can figure those things out socially. And that's something that EPA, I don't think, is something that they don't ever take into consideration, which is, I think, probably going to have to be more and more something considered, is like, what is the social impact of this? People may, be listening, and we interview a lot of people that are using different types of production methods where they aren't having to depend on chemicals as much. And I know that people are asking, well, why doesn't everyone just do that? Why can't, if so-and-so can do that, then why can't this other person do that? And I think you would probably have a good, give us just a little synopsis of why everybody doesn't do it exactly the same.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is based off where you live, right? So some of it is our pest pressure in the Southeast, because we grow crops year round. We have very wet weather. It doesn't get very cold, so it doesn't kill the insects. It's not like being in the upper Midwest, maybe, where you have less insect pressure. We have a lot of insect pressure. We've had insects that have been there's a lot of people who remember the boll weevil, right? And so the boll weevil was mostly eradicated. I think but for the most part, the boll weevil is eradicated. And that was because of a pesticide. So I think that it depends on where you live. I think some of it depends on how many acres you farm, right? And so how much labor you have available. So where you can't use products, you may be doing hand weeding and hoeing and all of those things. I will say, I think that there's a misconception that organic means they don't use pesticides, and that is not true.
Right.
There are pesticides that are allowed to be used in organic production. So I think that's a little bit of a misnomer, is that organic production doesn't use any pesticides, but that's just not true.
Right.
They do.
Right. Or if there's, and everything's a chemical. I mean, I think it's important for us to remember that literally the world is made up of chemicals. So everything is chemicals. So there's things that are available. I mean, there's regulations behind that too.
Behind all of it. Yeah. Yes. So I mean, all of these are,
they have to fit within certain boundaries of what organic. I mean, So there are biopesticides. There's all different kinds of products, but they're still all registered and regulated by EPA. And so it doesn't matter if it's available as a organic certified product, a product that you can use in organic production through OMRI or USDA. There's a list. And so, but the idea that there's none is just right. And I think also part of it is that, it takes a long time to understand the consequences of some things. And so we're just now really recognizing how much life is in the soil, how much microbial life is there. And that's not listed on the endangered species list. So we haven't been looking at how does this chemical impact the microbial life of the soil. So as we get more evidence, some more science behind those things, are you thinking that that's something that will eventually be something that is looked at when a chemical is being registered?
I don't know. I guess having come from the soil health world, right, doing systems, I haven't really, I think I would have to think about how you would do that testing, right? Like what that would look like. I don't know. I guess I don't mind saying I don't know. I think
because we understand so little about that ecosystem. We don't really, I know I have a friend that is, she's a microbiologist, whatever, scientist. And she's like, I could spend my entire life researching one microbe and never fully comprehend its life cycle and what's impacting it and all these things. And there are literally billions of different kinds of life even in a teaspoon of soil. It's or there should be anyway. We think that there should be, right?
And I think it's how our production methods fit together, right? So that is one of the struggles about agricultural research, right? Is that, we're dependent on the weather, right?
Yes.
You can have a research trial out there and you can have a great year, and then the next year you have a hurricane.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And
yes.
So
yes.
How you do research, especially at the field level, so in the field, it becomes difficult because you are at the mercy of the weather and whether or not you get enough rain or too much rain, whether or not it's really hot. So every year is different. That's
it's so true. And that's one of the things, I've done some work in the hemp industry, and there's so many people in the hemp industry that know nothing about anything that has to do with anything but hemp. And that's why you hear so many people say it can make 10,000. It's the only plant that can make 10,000 or 150,000 or 60,000 different things, because they don't know that actually grain sorghum sequesters a lot of carbon and you can make other things out of it, and cotton actually has more cellulose, so things like that people are just not aware of, know. And I will tell people ag moves in decades.
It does.
It's decades. And until ag becomes interested in hemp as a commodity, it's not going to go anywhere very fast, Well,
I think we've talked about this before. I think everything's dependent on markets, right? So
it is.
You have to have
it is. There's too many things that are, yes.
Right. There's so many parts that go along with it. But I think that, I think agriculture is very personal, right? So most of our farms are still family-owned farms.
Yes.
And it is personal. And
it is.
I think that, growers do want to protect their soil. I mean, it's why my family started no-tilling in the 80s. Like, there is this drive to protect their soil because they understand the consequence if they don't, right? But they also understand that without technologies, whatever those look like, from whether it's the newest technology for a sprayer or the newest technology for a combine, the newest chemical technology, those are the things that help us produce enough to be able to feed not just people in the U.S., but the world.
Yes. So, and I think that you said something just in passing there that in the 80s, you started doing no-till. I think it's important for people to understand that some of the things, the production systems that they're hearing about now are not necessarily new.
No.
And that like a lot of farmers have tried them, and maybe they didn't have maybe some of the technology or some of the knowledge that we have now. And so when they tried them in the past, they didn't work. Yes. And I'm not saying that they wouldn't work now or they would work. I'm not going to speak for everybody's blanket statement. I'm just saying that to think that some of these new ideas are new is not necessarily the case, and that farmers have been aware of some of this for a long time, and whether it fits or doesn't fit into their systems. And I mean, some people are just stubborn. Doesn't matter if it works or not. Their granddad didn't do it. They're not going to do it. But
that's just
people.
That's a standard thing. And,
people are just people.
Is that you always are going to have people who are not going to change, right?
Yes.
Like, always.
Yes.
But I think that because agriculture is very different depending on the region that you are in the country, right? So agriculture in the Southeast is very different than agriculture in the Midwest. I've worked in both of those spaces. So why we started doing no-till and cover crops earlier in the Southeast. So at Auburn University, they have what's called the old rotation. It's the longest cover crop rotation, I think, maybe in the world. I don't know, it's at least in the US. And it's been like since the late 1800s. They've been using what they call green manure. So we called it something different, but it's the same concept. And so it was out of necessity, right? Because when you grow cotton year after year after year after year after year and you don't put anything back into the soil, there is a consequence to that.
There is, yes.
We realized it a lot sooner here than other parts of the country. So the adoption of cover crops and no-till have historically been higher in the Southeast, because it was out of necessity.
Right. And what people may not know is somebody who contributed to that knowledge is George Washington Carver, who said we have to have something else to grow on rotation, and said peanuts are the thing.
Yes.
And peanuts also here where we are, and they helped us with a horrible nematode problem that we had from cotton. So a nematode is also a biological little critter that lives in the soil, and it will destroy your cotton crop. And we didn't have any way of fighting that at the time, and so rotation with peanuts helps. So there's a lot of things that have happened, but until you know, you don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, so, and sometimes it takes a while, I think that things will continually improve and change, and maybe we're learning some negative impacts, environmental impacts of things that we've always used, or maybe people are going to be surprised to know that maybe, that the impact is not as much as they think. And then we'll see, what happens. Like, you're not on that FDA side, but what they're looking at is that residue. What is that residue of those pesticides that are in our food? And for people to know, there's literally limits for arsenic. You can have X amount of parts per million for arsenic. And that's one of the reasons why we just recently, our legislatures passed this ban. So you have 0 detectable limits of THC in hemp. So which means that you can't grow hemp. I mean, people, you cannot grow hemp. If you find a variety that's genetically modified and there's no THC, okay. But for now, you can't grow something. You can't grow it.
You wouldn't want that, right? So there's always, I think there's all these competing interests. And I think that, I guess it needs to be science-based We have to have the science. EPA depends on the science. They provide the science. The registrants who are registering chemicals believe in the science, right? Like it's important, right?
Right.
All this, having a science-based approach and really understanding the science, and all the people out there doing work, whether it's universities who are doing research on products and production methods, whether it's the government, whether it's private labs, whoever those people are doing, they're doing science-based work, and that's really important.
Well, and I think it too, like using those third-party labs, those labs don't want something to come back and bite them. I mean, hey, maybe it is an evil company and they don't care who they kill. They still have to make it through that third-party lab who says, I care,
That's a bad business model for anybody, right? And so I think, companies put so much money into developing products. It takes years and a lot of money, and they put a lot of effort into it, and they want it to get through the registration process, and they want it to be able to go out and be used by growers to produce their crops, or use it on their fields or golf course or wherever it's being used. And so they're never going to make a decision that's going to actually make it so their product can't be sold, right? Like that's not a good end game, right? And so I think that I think that's a big part of it is it is in their best interest to make sure that they're following the guidelines and having the studies done and meeting the requirements of EPA. And providing the information they need to the EPA to make sure that their products are registered, because they've invested a lot of money in making sure that those products.
Well, and I think it's important for us to remember that we've got to not decide before we know. Yeah. And it is really hard. I mean, I struggle with it a lot too, and struggle with like, who do you listen to? And I mean, there's a lot of loud voices out there, but what I find is like, there's also places all over the internet that you can go to find peer-reviewed research, and you can go down and you can look at like the list of people who sponsored that research, any type of, conflict of interest that those researchers might have. And the internet is like, if you don't believe that, then just go on the internet and research the researcher, and you will find a whole lot about them. So it takes a lot of time to do that, but in the world that we live in, either you find someone that you trust that's doing that for you, or you do it yourself, because to think on both sides, there's ulterior motives.
Voices,
and so we have to figure out how to cut through some of that and make good decisions. And we're not here to like say this is what you should believe. We're here to say, hey, this is just how this is working in the real world. Like, this is how it's working, and this is the things that we're seeing. And you're seeing something else, then bring that into the mix, and making your decisions. But we want people to be informed. And this is an odd time for sure. And there's a lot of things that we're not sure what's going to happen. But that's not the first time it's been that way for us, for everybody in the world. It's always. That's exactly right. Exactly right. Well, Leah, thanks for joining us. This has been really, really interesting and very educational for me. And I hope that our listeners have enjoyed it as well. I think it's really a unique conversation that most people might not actually hear about. So we're going to provide all your information in the show notes. And if people have questions and stuff, it's okay if they reach out and say, yeah, but what about?
There's always going to be what about.
Yes, exactly. So I appreciate your time. And friends of Sarah, thanks for joining us for another edition of Conservation Stories. If you found this to be helpful, would you please share it and like and maybe even review it? That does so much good for us and for the people that sponsor our podcast. So we look forward to another episode. We'll see you again, friends.